Good afternoon. So, today I'm going to continue where I left off in the day before yesterday, talking about calculus. And today my plan is to introduce you to the concepts of integrals, which are the opposite of derivatives that we learned last class. And we are also going to see something very nice called the Taylor series and use it to prove something called the Euler identity. And you should know before we start this that the Euler identity is usually said to be most beautiful formula in all of mathematics. And today we are going to prove the most beautiful formula. So we are going to continue where we left off, calculus. So we can start with talking about what an integral is. So a common problem which might be, let's say you have a graph of some function, like say you have x square, a parabola. Then a common problem that people in ancient times, ancient Indians, ancient Greeks, the mathematicians wanted to solve is, what is the area under this parabola? What is the area under this figure? And the area under a graph figure like this is what we call an integral. And usually we denote the integral with this symbol. This is looking like a letter S, but it's stretched out. And the reason it looks like letter S is because it's like a sum. It's almost like you're summing up all of these, but not a sum, because instead of one number you get an area. So the integral notation is, if you put the bottom number here and the top number here, and you put some function here, and this notation basically means what is the area under the x squared function between 0 and 1. So this is 0 and this is 1, you have the area under this function. So lots of problems of areas of figures can essentially be taught of integrals like this, and it's easy if this shape is a normal shape, like a line shape. Then you can use the areas that you have learned for area of a triangle of a square to solve that problem quite easily. So I'll show you one example of this, which is a very beautiful proof that the area of a circle is equal to pi r squared. So this is a circle, roughly drawn, but it's still good. We have the radius r, and the circumference is 2 pi r, and this is by the definition of pi. Pi is the ratio of diameter to circumference, so it's half the ratio of radius to circumference. This is by definition of pi. Now the question is, what's the area of this? And it might seem challenging to find the area of the entire shape all at once. So what we can do is, we can split the shape up into many of these smaller bands, like these concentric rings. And you can imagine that each of these bands has some length of this dx is the width of each of these bands. And you can cut into as fine bands as we want. You can cut into as many bands as we want. And the idea is eventually we will cut into an infinite amount of bands. So if this is dx, then we can calculate this circumference. The circumference will be 2 pi times the total radius of each band. Now, this we have somehow made the problem harder, so because we are taking a ring instead of a circle. But what I can do is, one of these rings like this, I can unwrap the ring into some shape like this. I take the ring, cut it and unwrap it into this, and the height of this will be some dx, and the width of the top or bottom will be the circumference. The circumference is 2 pi times the total radius. Now, what shape will this be? We cannot say that it's any easily known shape. We cannot say it's a rectangle, because there's some curvature. When we do unwrapping, it becomes curved a bit. But the idea of calculus, yes, cutting into small pieces. So if we cut into very, very small pieces, if dx is very, very small, very close to 0, but not exactly equal to 0, like we said in the last lecture, then this will almost exactly be a rectangle. So we can say that each of these shapes is almost exactly a rectangle, and the question is, how do we find the area of each one of these shapes and how do we add it up? So we can plot this on a graph and we can show that for the area of the first innermost wing, we have this length dx, which is the size of the wing, and at the circumference of the wing, which will be 2 pi times that height. So you have the circumference, which is 2 pi r, and this is the area of the innermost wing. Now for the second wing, it also has a height of dx, the same height, but the circumference is now double because it's 2 pi the radius, and the radius is what it was plus dx. So you can imagine that the increase that we add here is 2 pi dx, and it's increasing by 2 pi dx for every time that we add. Now we can add a third strip again of length dx, and the concept is we can continue doing this, and we can continue plotting into some number of dx's until you have added all this dx into the total radius of the circle. And in this case, the total circumference of this will be 2 pi r. Now you have all these thin rectangles, and you might think you have to calculate the area of each of these rectangles and sum them up, which is very difficult. Again, big sum. But you can see that as we go into smaller and smaller rectangles, finer and finer rectangles, what this will approach, it will go close to being this perfect triangle. So what we have seen here is one of the core concepts of integrals, that as you divide these rectangles into smaller dx, you approach the true area of the figure. So to find this area, you can just add all these small dx portions and get the answer. Now we have the triangle, and the area of this triangle is equal to the area of the circle. What we've done is essentially unwrap the circle into the triangle with base r and height 2 pi r. Now, of course, one of the lower grade students here might know the formula for area of a triangle. Half base of the height. So we have the base r, height is 2 pi r, and we take half of that. These cancel, r and r multiply, and we get pi r squared. Exactly. So what we have done is twofold. We have shown that the area of this circle is equal to pi r squared, which is a long-standing problem for many of the ancient geometers. And the second thing is that we have shown this function with the equation y is equal to 2 pi x. And what we have essentially proved is the integral of this formula for 0 to r, which is the area of the circle, is equal to pi r squared. So this is the concept of integral, how you can find the area of these functions. Now you might think, why am I bringing up this integral? This seems very disconnected and unrelated from what we discussed last session. Last session we discovered the derivative, and this seems very different from the derivative. In fact, it seems like the almost exact opposite of the derivative. So what I'll show you is something called the fundamental theorem of calculus, and from that name itself you can tell fundamental theorem is going to be important. It relates the integral and the derivative together. So the problem is this. I have some function, it doesn't matter what function, it can be anything, this function, and I have the integral. The integral itself I can think of as a function. And I can create another function called the integral, which basically answers the question up between 0 and this point. What is the total area of the region? And I'll just do some evaluation right now. Sometimes this function might go below 0 or above 0. If it goes below 0, then the area under axis will take a negative. So the area above the axis minus area below the axis is the integral. I'll show you why this makes sense in a few moments. But we have this function and we have the integral. Just like in previous classes, we showed the function x squared by drawing a square with area x squared. Similarly now, we have this region whose area is defined as the result of our integral function. Now, because this is a function, we can take the derivative of it like we take the derivative of any other function last class. Now you might remember how we defined the derivative last class. You add some extra portion dx, which is not 0 but very very small and close to 0. Then adding dx adds something new to the function. This is the area we add to the function, and we see how this extra amount changes the function, and we divide by dx, and that effectively is the slope of our function. Now we add dx to the input of our integral function. The input of our function is the x-axis region and the output is the area. So we add this dx of the x-axis. How does the area change? You can clearly see we are adding this much area to it. But what is the value of this much area? Well, let's say this function is f of x and this point here is our x. This means that you can treat this as almost a rectangle with length dx and the height of f of x. And importantly, it's not exactly a rectangle. You can see we have this inaccuracy here. But the thing about calculus is we can make dx smaller, like we can divide this rectangle into 2 or into smaller portions to reduce the inaccuracy of this estimation. But right now we are estimating that this area is a pure perfect rectangle with height fx and area dx. In this case, area that we add is fx times d of x. And we divide by dx to get the derivative. So what we have shown is that the derivative of the integral of f of x is equal to f of x. And this is the fundamental theorem of calculus. The derivative of the integral equals the original function. Now you should realize how important this is. It means that the rate that the area under the graph changes is equal to the graph itself. So now we have a way to calculate integrals for some random function that we don't know. We are already quite skilled in finding the derivatives, which we learned last class. So now we can find integrals by simply answering the question, what is the opposite of the derivative? What can I derive such that I get the original function? For instance, simple one. What is the derivative of the function x squared? The derivative we all know is 2x, but what's the integral? So the question is, we have to find what function has its derivative x squared. Now, can you think of any function that might possibly have x squared or something like x squared as a derivative? Well, you might see that last class we showed the power rule that the derivative of x to the n is n times x to the n minus 1. So the derivative of x cubed is going to be, you move the power down 3 times x to the smallest x squared, 3x squared. So then, if x cube's derivative is 3x squared, derivative of x cubed over 3 will just be x squared. So that is our answer. The integral of x squared is equal to x cubed over 3. And the reason that this is that we know that the rate that x cubed over 3 changes is exactly equal to x squared. So if you add tiny bit of portion to the x squared graph, the rate that x cubed over 3 changes is equal equal to x squared, the area that we're calculating. Now, is anyone here have a problem with what we've defined? Yeah. So the concept of a negative area is that if we take this, the function goes below the x-axis, then we treat this as negative sign and above as positive sign. The reason is, we are saying the area of this rectangle is this times the height. But if the height is negative, then by that definition the area will also have to be negative.
Axis of line above how we measure
We don't directly measure the area. Instead of finding the area, we find a function whose derivative is equal to the original function. We have this function and we don't know what its area is. Instead of directly calculating, we try to look for patterns in other functions to find what this will have this as its derivative and therefore it will have an integral. I'll give you another example. Let's take the function sine of x. And I know that some people were having issues with the definition of sine and cosine and the trigonometric functions last class. So I'll use this as an opportunity to explain properly what sine of x is. If you have a circle with radius 1 and you take some angle from it, this angle theta, then you can, this goes on to this point. Now, the height of this point is defined to be sine of theta, sine of the angle. And the length of this point is defined to be cosine of the angle. Now, the higher grades might have seen a different definition, which is more geometrical. And if you're in a higher grade, I can say that this is the same as the definition that you have learned, because this hypotenuse is 1. So sine being opposite over hypotenuse just means it's in this diagram sine is the opposite and we're dividing by 1. So you can think of this as an easy way to remember what sine and cosine mean. Sine is the height and cosine is the width given the angle. And it's also that you easily see the different positive and negative signs of the angle. So the sine function is positive when the angle is between 90 and negative 90. Cosine is positive when the angle is between 0 and 180. You don't necessarily have to note this down because you definitely learn in higher grades trigonometry. Cosine. Cosine means the length. Sine means the height. This is the length. So cosine of 0 would be, cosine is the horizontal. So cosine of 0 degrees will be 1. Because 0 degrees line is fully horizontal. Cosine of 0 will be 1. I'm just erasing this. So now, what I can introduce you is to the graph of the sine and cosine functions. I realize some of the most dedicated students who are paying attention are currently writing down their notes. So I'll just encourage you to pay attention to the graph here. Basically, the sine function means the vertical height of the angle. Sine of 0 is 0 because it has no vertical. But as we keep on increasing, the angle goes up and the sine of 90 degrees angle is equal to 1 because it's perfectly vertical. Then the height decreases and decreases, it becomes negative because angles are going down. And then it becomes positive. This is the function for sine of x. Cosine of x is the horizontal distance and the graph is like this. It's height of cosine of 0 because cosine of 0 is the horizontal length of 0 degrees, which is just 1. So this is sine and this is cosine, the graphs. And one more thing I would like to note, this is a matter of notation. Usually we don't measure angles in degrees because we take 360 degrees as one full angle, but 360 degrees is an old thing that was made by some person in IVAC 3000 years ago because they thought 360 was a whole number. Now the usual way we measure angles is using a unit called radians. The concept is the radius of a circle will be 1, then 1 radian is the angle that one unit makes around the circumference. So if the radius of the circle is 1, then the circumference will be 2 times pi. So we can say that 2 times pi radians is the whole circle, because the whole circle length is 2 pi with radius 1. Similarly, half the circle is equal to pi radians equal to 180 degrees. So 180 degrees is equal to pi radians, 360 is 2 pi radians, and this is our more natural and easy to understand version because it makes everything cancel out into the maths. So we have the sine and cosine functions. What are the integrals? Well, to find the area under the cosine function is the integral of cosine. We need to find a function whose derivative is equal to cosine. Last class, we have learned the derivative of sine is equal to cosine, and the derivative of cosine is equal to negative sine. So, therefore, since derivative sine of cosine, integral is the opposite of derivative. So, cosine integral is sine. So, this function, the sine function, is a measure of the area under this function, the cosine function. So, at x equals 0, sine is 0 because there is no area to be counted. Sine reaches its peak here. When cosine is done, what you would call a 90 degree turn or pi divided by 2 radian turn. When this area is highest, sine is at the highest. But then this area starts going down, area becomes negative. So this area from here to here, this is just a mirror copy of this. So the cosine area is 0, which is why sine of 180 is 0. So like that you can see that the integral of cosine is negative sine quite visually in a nice way. And we can take the opposite of this as well. What's the integral of sine? It's a function whose derivative is equal to sine, which happens to be negative cosine. So the area under the sine function, you will see, has the area which is equal to the negative of the cosine function. Cosine means cosine is the negative of the area under sine. Sorry, the integral of sine is equal to negative cosine, but that does not mean integrals work in absolute way. But cosine starts high, then goes low, then goes high. Sine starts 0, high, 0, low, 0. Cosine goes high, 0, low, 0, high. This one is cosine, this one is sine. So I'm just putting these values up because they will be useful later. So that's the idea of integrals and the fundamental theorem of calculus. Now does anyone have any doubts? Because I've seen that over most of these, only this lady and this boy have answered the question.
Sine of 180 is equal to 0.
Yes, because if you have 180 degree angle, the height is equal to 0. That's made half a turn. So sine of 180 is equal to 0. Now, what cosine of 180 is equal to minus 1. Because this is 1 horizontal. If you do this, this becomes 1 negative. So this has been the fundamental theorem of calculus, showing how integrals and derivatives relate. And we can actually take this by trying to do the integration of the area of a circle. See, if we want to figure out the area of a circle, we can start by finding the area of this top half. The area of this top half will just be the sum of these vertical portions, which will just be sine. So, really, for every angle, we are integrating across this length sine, and the integral of sine is negative cosine. Now, there's a point I have to make. What if integral value starts below 0, like negative cosine has a value that looks like this? In this case, what you do is you measure the distance that has moved up. For instance, the area under sine from here to here, this area under sine, to calculate this, you take this value of the integral, this value of the integral, and take the difference between them. And therefore, the difference between these values will be the total area of this. I'll show you another interesting example where we will use both implicit differentiation and integration to find the answer. What is the area under the function 1 over x? Now, you might think that we can use power rule as x to the power minus 1, but this does not work because you get division by 0. So to find area under 1 over x, we have to do some experimentation. So we take this function, ln of x, the logarithm, which is what we discussed last class, the reverse of e to the power x, e to the log n of x is equal to x. Now to find the derivative of log over x, we can use the implicit differentiation. We know at this particular point on the graph, we know that y is equal to ln x, this is the defining property, and therefore, in other words, e to the power of y is equal to x. Now, we can differentiate both sides and get e to the power of y dy is equal to dx. So, we can take dy over dx and find that dy over dx, in some algebra, will be equal to 1 over e to the power of y. But e to the power of y is x. We define that. So this will just be 1 over x. So what we found is that the derivative of log n of x is equal to this function 1 over x. Therefore, the integral of 1 over x will be ln of x. And this lets me answer what to do when an integral is negative. See, integral, the value of log over x in this whole region is negative, but 1 over x is positive. The reason for that is that log over log n x goes to negative infinity, because the integral of 1 over x from 0 to any other value is equal to infinity. The area under 1 over x from 0 to anything is infinity, because this goes to infinity. 1 over 0 is infinity. So we cannot calculate the area under 1 over x between 0 and 2. What we can calculate is area under 1 over x between 1 and 2. We can calculate that by finding the value of log n over x at one value, and we subtract the value of another value, and the difference between these is the integral. If we try finding the area which is 0, we get infinity, because log n goes to negative infinity at 0. So this means that integral is not really a measure of the total area. It's a measure of how the area is changing because of the fundamental term in the calculus. We may not know what the area is at this point, but we do know that the way the area changes will be equal to the function itself. So this is the basic concept behind the integrals and the fundamental theorem of calculus. Now, calculating integrals is quite complicated. You obviously have the technique I use here, which is just trying to find the reverse derivative. But there are many techniques. Integration by parts, use substitution, like this have many techniques you can use to find integrals. Just like the many rules we did to find the derivatives. Now, all that we did just now is the side plot of the day. Today's main mistake is learning about the Taylor series. Now, I mentioned that at the beginning of last section when I was talking about history of calculus, that Madhava of Kerala, Indian mathematician 1300s, discovered the Taylor series. And I'm going to explain what he discovered here. So, how many of you are aware of the definition of the word polynomial? You have heard the definition of this word? At least a few of you know it. So a polynomial is a function. A polynomial is a function which is always equal to. You can see here. So who here? Can you raise your hand if any of you know the definition? You said you know. I think. One of you mentioned that you know the polynomial definition.
The equation that have
The equation that
terms.
the two terms is binomial. Bi means two. Poly means many. So a polynomial, you can think of it as some equation like this, where it is the sum of multiple powers of x, which are all integers. This is a polynomial. We have a constant term plus something times x plus something times x squared times x cubed, something is x squared and so on. Polynomials, they are really nice functions. And the reason they are so nice is because they are complicated, it is easy for you to calculate, and it's easy to calculate the derivative as well. Because we can easily find derivative of x, x squared, x cubed and so on using the power rule. So I'll just show a few examples of derivatives of polynomials. I might construct the polynomial like so. Sum number a plus b times x, cx squared, x to dx for. This is an equation that you find as a polynomial where a, b, c, d can be any value. You can cut it off earlier. For example, if you ignore DNA, just a plus bx plus cx squared. It is called quadratic polynomial. And like that, you can cut off at any point. But I'm using this for my illustration. Let us find the derivative of this. The derivative of a constant value, a. Derivative is the rate of change, but a is not changing. So, derivative a will go to 0. Bx goes to b. Cx squared. The way you do this is you put the power in front of the thing and you increase the power by 1. Remember why is the power rule like this? Put the power in front of the value and decrease the power. So cx squared 2 comes in front and we get 2cx. dx 3 comes in front and we get x and 4x raised to the respective powers. So 3dx squared and 4x cubed. Now this is the first derivative. Now I am going to do something interesting by taking derivative of the derivative. The b is a constant that goes to 0 when we take this derivative. The 2cx becomes 2c. 3dx squared becomes 3 times 2, which is 6 times dx. We are taking the 3 which is already there, multiplying it by 2. The d first had a 3 which came in front, then it had a 2 which came in front. 3 times 2 is 6. Important to remember. And finally 4ex cubed, 4 times 3 will be equal to 12 ex squared. Now, you might think, we take ex4, then that power gets reduced and then it gets reduced again. Yes, 6. What we've done, no, the idea is this. Listen carefully. We have dx cubed. Now when we take the derivative first time, the 3 comes in front. So we get 3 dx squared. When we take derivative the second time, 2 comes in front. So we have 3 times 2 is 6. Similarly here, we have 4 times 3 is 12. So, now this might look complicated, but I'll tell you that by simplify. If x is equal to 0, then anything is multiplied by x you can just ignore. So in the special case when x equals 0, you only have to pay attention to these beginning terms. Everything after gets ignored. Now, I will take the derivative another time. to get 6d plus 12ex squared. The square gets multiplied by 2. 12 times 2 is 24ex. And finally, when I take the fourth derivative, we get 24e. So these are the derivatives of taking polynomials a series of times. B, 2c, 6d, 24e. And what you'll notice is we are each time multiplying by the next number. For example, if you take this as 1b, 1 is equal to 1. Then 2 is equal to 1 times 2. 6 is equal to 1 times 3. And then 24 is 1 times 2 times 3 times 4. 1, 2, 3, 4 multiplied is 24. Now what this means, the reason for this, is that if we take a big power, ex4, when we take derivative with first and the 4 comes in front, then this becomes 3. Next time we take the 3 comes in front, this becomes 3. Next time 2 comes in front, this becomes 1, and so on. So therefore, we get these two numbers of multiplying this. So in general, the notation that mathematicians have come up with, in exclamation mark, you thought mathematicians didn't have enough symbols, they have the exclamation marks in them. This becomes n factorial. N factorial, factorial of n is equal to n times the number below n times the number below that, and so on and so forth until it gets 3 times 2 times 1. So n factorial is multiplying every number below n. In this case, we will see 24 is 4 factorial. And this number is 3 factorial and 2 factorial. And that is where these numbers come from. So now you understand that when each time we take the derivatives, we get these factorial terms in the term expression. Now you may ask, why on earth will you take derivatives so many times? Why would you need fourth derivative, fifth derivative? And I'll show you. So let's say your Madhava, mathematician of Kerala, in 1300s, you want to calculate sine and cos of certain functions. But thing is, sine and cos are not easy to find in formulas. There are some random decimal places. It is very hard for you to calculate. Now you wish for your life as Madhava that there would be an easier way to find value of sine function out for small numbers. If you could find its sine function is equal to a polynomial, that would be very easy because polynomials are easy to calculate. Sine will not be equal to polynomial clearly, but it will be approximately very close to a polynomial. That is your question. So this is the idea behind Taylor series. What I'll do is I'll just graph sine effects again, and I'll just do it behind also. And you want a polynomial that is very close to sine effects. Now this polynomial can't be close to sine effects and everything. At some point far into the future, polynomial will move away. But Madhava, you are very honest man, very grateful. So you want a polynomial that is close to sine effects when x is very close to 0. So your polynomial will have the first term being a constant term. The constant term is the value of the function at 0. All the other x squared, x cubed, with 0 they turn to nothing. The constant term decides what the value is at 0. Sine of 0 is 0. So if you want any good approximation, the constant term should also be 0. So we take 0 as the first term in our polynomial. But then how to find the next term? In your polynomial approximation, how to find what is the next term, which is a linear term, something times x. Well, if you take the derivative of 0 times something times x, it will come to that something. And at the value x equals 0, anything else will be cancelled. So this value is going to be decided what the derivative of your polynomial is at x equals 0. So you want whatever the polynomial you make is, you want it to be close to sine. Very like the sine function. Sine function derivative at 0 is equal to cosine 0, that is just 1. So therefore, next term you write 1. So this function 0 plus 1x, if I may plot it, you may think it is a bad approximation of sine, but it's actually a good approximation. Because at 0, it is the same value as sine and it has the same derivative as sine at 0. So it's a good approximation of sine near 0. And this is why we're using variance, by the way. This math becomes much easier if you use variance. If you use derivatives, you get 360 terms everywhere. So I have 0 plus 1x. Next, we have the quadratic term, x squared. In this term, we'll control what the second derivative is. But it won't just be entirely the second derivative. Because remember, 2 comes out. So because of that, this times 2 factorial will be the second derivative. You want your function to be very much like sine, copy of sine. So it should have the same second derivative as sine. I'll just give the values on the board here for the derivative. So the derivative of sine at 0 will be equal to 1. The second derivative of sine at 0 will be equal to 0. Because cos is negative sine, third derivative will be derivative of negative sine, negative cosine, which comes to minus 1. And fourth derivative will be equal to 0, and from there it repeats. These are the cycles of derivative of sine. So if you take derivative from 160 to derivative of sine, I can guarantee it will be 0 because of the cycle that repeats. Now, second derivative of sine at 0 is equal to 0. So the x squared term should also be 0. Do you understand roughly the concept of what I'm doing here? I try to make a polynomial which at 0 has the same value of sine, same derivative as sine, same derivative of derivative as sine, third derivative, fourth derivative, and so on, exact same as sine at the point x equals 0. Does anyone have any doubts? So, for the third derivative, we want equal to negative 1. You might think that you can put this by doing minus 1x cubed. But this is incorrect. Why? Because when we do the derivatives, we multiply by factorials. So, if we put this, the third derivative would be minus 1 times 3 factorial, which will be minus 6, not minus 1. So instead, you cut off by doing minus 1 and 6 x cubed. So when x cubed gets multiplied by 3 factorial, which is 6, the derivative will come to minus 1. So what we have here is a function x minus 1 6 x cubed. And this is a very good approximation of sine function for very small angles. It has the same value, derivative second and third derivative at the point x equals 0. So the idea of Taylor series is that you just keep going with this. You keep on evaluating the continuous derivatives at each point and you divide by the factorials so that when you take the derivatives, you multiply by the factorials and you get the right value. So the Taylor series for sine would be something like 1x minus 1 by 6x cubed plus 1 by 120 x to the power 5 and so on and so forth. 1 divided by whatever 7 factorial is x to the 7th power and so on. This function has all the same derivatives of sine at x equals 0. Now, this is a good approximation for sine at x equals 0. Question is, will it be good approximation for sine everywhere? And this depends on what function you use. For sine and cosine and the other neat functions, it turns out the answer is yes. It turns out that this is exactly equal to sine. So if you do this full thing, you will always get exactly sine of x, if x is in the variance unit I discussed. So this, in a sense, is the definition of sine, this expansion. It will become closer and closer to sine as you add more and more terms until eventually this is sine. higher grades may understand how beautiful this is. Because the sine function is from trigonometry, it's a random set of decimals. There's no usual way to calculate it, yet with this polynomial, we are defined it and we have gotten sine of x. So this is the Taylor series for sine of x. Now you can also do the same thing for cosine of x. Cosine, if you take the derivatives, the derivative series turns out to be exactly one offset of it. So cosine derivative is minus 1, then 0, then 1, then 0. So you can write the cosine function as 1 minus x, so that when we take the first derivative, it comes to minus 1, which is what the derivative of cosine is. Oh, sorry, I mixed up. I did 2 offset, it should be 1. So the actual derivative series of cosine will be the first derivative is equal to 0, then the second derivative of that will be minus 1. So you get 1 minus 1 over x squared, or 1 by 2, because you divide by 2 factorial. Then you add 1 by 24 x4 and so on and so forth. This is equal to cosine of x. And you might think that I'm pulling these series out randomly, but it's true that if you do the evaluation, you will have the same derivatives as cosine of x everywhere. So now we have a Taylor series of sine and cosine of x. Now the third important factor is the derivative of Taylor series of e to the power x. And this is very important because the derivative of e to the x equal to e to the x at all points. We learned this last class. E is defined as a special number with the property that derivative of e to the x is e to the x. So e to the power 0 at point 0, it has the value 1. It also has therefore the derivative 1 and the derivative of 1 and so on and so forth. So you can write 1 plus 1x plus 1 by 2x squared plus 1 by 6x cubed, 24x squared and so on and so forth. And this is the equation for e to the power x. And you can see that if I actually set x equal to 1 to find e, then already x is, the powers of x cancel, they become 1. And if you remove all the x from this side, you get a perfect series finding the value of e. And in general, this will always be equal to the value of e to the x. Now everyone here is good with the concept of Taylor series. 5 factorial. 5 times 4 times 3 times 2 times 1. So if you take x to the 5 and you find the derivatives, 5 goes down, 4 times goes down, 3 goes down, and you all multiply to 120. 5 times 24. So we have all of these elements of the Taylor series. So now we can get to the important. Because those are the factorial values. The 2 is equal to 1 times 2. 6 is equal to 1 times 2 times 3. This is equal to 1 times 3 times 3 times 4. And these are the values that get when you continuously loop these derivatives and you unwrap them. Then you expand it to 4, then you expand 3, expand 2, and it's evaluated to 24. Same these we have 120 here. And in general, 7 factorial, which is just 7 times 6 times 5, and so on. So it's actually going to be productive to note these down. I'm going to have to erase because I don't have enough space. got to remind about how much time we have. So how much time do you have remaining on the clock? I can see the clock.
5 minutes.
5 minutes. Okay, in that case, Euler's identity is complicated. I will not be able to teach in merely 5 minutes. But you get this beautiful result when you expand the Taylor series. Now, because we have 5 minutes left, I would like to pause the teaching about mathematics and just teach a few things about where you can learn more about this mathematics. I won't have time after this to tell you, but other people will have the opportunity to tell you. You can learn about mathematics from many of the interesting sources. For example, online, I mostly learn my mathematics not from reading textbooks, I learn from internet. If you are really interested in mathematics and from YouTube channels and such sources, you can pick up a good understanding of mathematics. A lot of what I taught you over the today and the day before was taught from one particular series from a YouTube channel called by Grant Sanderson. His videos are very interesting and they are a good starting point if you want to learn more about mathematics. Grant Sanderson's videos. Grant Sanderson. Online you can find 3 blue, 1 brown. That's if some mathematics joke give us 3 blue, 1 brown is the name of his channel.
3 blue,
1 brown. Yeah. There's many interesting channels like this. This is where I divide most of the material. Blue, 1 brown. So very nice channel for learning more about mathematics. So
7 blue.
3 blue, 1 brown. So if you want to learn more, there are many Olympiads and type of competitions you can use to prepare for the thing. Famously, there's the IMO, but that is extremely difficult. But there's still many recreational competitions. If you are in young age, you can try to see the AMC competition, American Maths Contest. It's an online competition. You don't have to be in America to do it, and it's good for learning about mathematics. IMO is another thing you can do, but it's a very high level. Preparing for the IMO is a very hard level, International Mathematics Olympiad, but it's still useful to learn. And online, I believe, is the best place to learn, because online is more powerful than thousands of textbooks. And in fact, what I will tell you is, I myself have a YouTube channel, Interesting Chat, and you can see reason filming this full session is that this video and the day before yesterday session will be uploaded on the channel. So if you have any issues, difficulties, you can basically use that to record. I have my own YouTube channel personally, and this is the name. I'm doing self-promotion. The Fantastic Academy is the